The night was almost silent. A young woman stood frozen beside a dark roadside office, staring at a man in a dirty transport vet. The man everyone called a tout was holding a thick envelope of money. Then he looked towards the security camera and whispered, "If they discover what is inside this envelope, they will blame me for everything." He dropped the envelope in his old bag and walked away. In the busy town of Malu, people were quick to decide what another person's life was worth. If you dressed well, people called you respectable. If you spoke good English, people called you educated. If you drove an expensive car, people assumed you had succeeded. But if you stood beside buses, shouting destinations and helping passengers with their luggage, many people looked at you as though you had already failed in life. This was how they saw Keno. Every morning before the sun became too hot, Keno arrived at Oru Transit Yard, a private-owned transport terminal on the edge of the town. He wore a faded brown vest, his shoes were old, his voice was loud, and his work was simple. He helped passengers find vehicles, carry luggages, directed buses into their spaces, and earned small payments from drivers and passengers. People called men like him many names, but this name Keno had most often was TOUT. Some even called him a street boy. Keno never argued. Every morning, Keno noticed the same woman walking past the terminal. Her name was Mira, confident, intelligent, and always dressed neatly. She worked at a small bookkeeping office across the road. Mira had seen Keno many times, but she never really saw him. To her, he was simply another noisy man at the transport yard. One morning, as she walked towards her office, Keno called out, "Madam, your bag!" Mira stopped. She looked down. The small side pocket of her handbag was open. Her purse was almost falling out. She quickly grabbed it. "Thank you." Keno smiled. "You're welcome." Mira continued walking. Then she turned back. "How did you notice?" Keno shrugged. "I watch people." She smiled faintly. "That's your job?" Keno laughed. "No, that's life." Mira shook her head and walked away. She didn't know why that simple answer stayed in her mind all day. Keno wasn't the loudest man at the terminal. He was simply the most observant. He knew which drivers arrived late. He knew which passengers were usually overcharged. He knew which elderly travelers needed help. He knew which workers were being cheated of their daily earnings. But there was another reason he paid such close attention. For months, money had been disappearing from the transport yard. The drivers complained, the loaders complained, the cleaners complained. Yet nobody could identify the person responsible. The terminal supervisor, Rafi, always had an explanation. It's accounting errors, it's fuel expenses, it's damaged equipment. It's missing receipts. And whenever anyone questioned him, Rafi had one simple response. "Maybe you should ask the touts." Everyone naturally suspected men like Keno. After all, who would trust a man in an old vest? Keno knew this, but instead of defending himself loudly, he started keeping records. Every payment, every receipt, every missing amount, every unusual transaction. He wrote everything in a small notebook he kept inside his bag. Nobody knew, not even his closest friend, Toma. One evening, Toma found him writing. "Brother, what are you always calculating?" Keno closed his notebook. "Nothing." Toma laughed. "You are nothing." Keno smiled. "Sometimes silence is safer than explaining yourself." Toma stared at him. "You're hiding something." Keno looked towards the terminal. "I am waiting for the right time." One afternoon, Mira was rushing across the road when she suddenly slipped. Her papers scattered everywhere. Before she could bend down, Keno was already helping her. He gathered every document. Then he noticed something. One of the documents contained a series of financial figures. Keno stared at it for a moment. "These numbers don't balance." Mira looked at him. "What?" He pointed. "You have two payments recorded under the same reference number." Mira frowned. "You understand accounting?" Keno handed the papers back. "A little." Mira studied him differently. "You are not what people say you are." Keno laughed. "People say many things." "Were you educated?" He hesitated, then he said, "Yes." "What happened?" Keno looked away. Life happened. Mira wanted to ask more, but he walked away. That night, Mira couldn't stop thinking about him. She had always assumed Keno was an uneducated street worker. But there was something unusual about him. He spoke carefully, he observed everything, and when he helped people, he never waited for praise. 3 days later, a transport driver named Bayo was accused of stealing a large amount of money from the terminal. Rafi called everyone together. "This money disappeared from the collection office," he announced. Everyone became silent. Rafi held up a receipt. "The last person seen near the office was Keno." All eyes turned towards him. Keno didn't move. Rafi pointed at him. "You were there." "Yes." "You entered the office." "Yes, sir." "You were alone." "Yes, sir." "So where's the money?" Keno looked directly at him. "I don't have it." Rafi laughed. "Of course you don't," a few workers whispered. One man muttered, "We always knew these street boys couldn't be trusted." Keno heard him, but he said nothing. Rafi ordered him to empty his bag. Keno slowly opened it. In it was his old towel, a bottle of water, his notebook, and a small pack of food. Nothing else. Rafi looked disappointed. Then he noticed the notebook. "What is this?" Keno closed it. "Personal records." Rafi reached for it. Keno stepped back. "No." The room became tense. Rafi narrowed his eyes. "What are you hiding?" Keno stared at him. "Something that doesn't belong to you." That evening, Keno found Mira waiting outside the terminal. "You need to tell me what is happening," she said. Keno looked surprised. "Why?" "Because I checked those figures you mentioned, and they are wrong." Keno said nothing. Mira continued. "There are payments leaving the terminal that never appear in the official records." Keno finally looked at her. "You shouldn't be investigating this." "Why?" "Because people who steal money don't like people who count it." Mira became quiet. Then she asked, "Are you investigating Rafi?" Keno didn't answer, but that was answer enough. Mira stepped closer. "Why are you doing this?" Keno looked towards the terminal. "Because people are losing money they worked hard to earn. That's all." He shook his head. "No." He reached into his bag. This time, he gave her the notebook. Inside were months of carefully recorded transactions. Mira's eyes widened. "You recorded all this?" "Yes." "Why didn't you report it? To whom?" Mira didn't have any answer, so Keno continued. "The people above Rafi trust him. And you think they will trust you?" Keno smiled sadly. "No." "Then what are you planning?" Keno looked at her. "I don't want them to trust me." He paused. "I want the truth to become impossible to ignore." The following morning, something unexpected happened. A financial auditor arrived at the transport yard. Everyone became nervous. Rafi immediately approached him. "Sir, we have already identified the problem." The auditor nodded. "Who?" Rafi pointed at Keno. Before Keno could respond, Mira stepped forward. "No!" Everyone turned. Mira held up a folder. The missing money wasn't taken by Keno. Rafi's expression changed. Mira continued. "The records were altered before the money disappeared." The auditor looked at the document. "Where did you get these?" Mira looked at Keno. "From someone everyone here considered too foolish to understand numbers." The auditor began comparing the records. Within minutes, he discovered something disturbing. The missing money wasn't disappearing randomly. It was being transferred through several small transactions. Each transaction was below the amount that would automatically trigger suspicion. Someone had deliberately designed the system to look like ordinary accounting mistakes, and there was one name connected to the approvals: Rafi. Rafi immediately protested. "This is nonsense." But then Keno pulled another paper from his bag. "This is the original record." Rafi stared at it. "How did you get that?" Keno replied calmly. "You taught me something without knowing it." Rafi frowned. "What?" "People who think they are smarter than everyone else become careless." The investigation continued, but there was one final surprise. Mira discovered that Keno wasn't simply an educated man who had fallen into transport work. He had once worked as a junior accounts assistant. He had been offered a better position elsewhere, but instead of taking it immediately, he had stayed at the terminal because he had discovered that several workers were being underpaid. He wanted to understand what was happening. Rather than fight loudly and risk losing his income, he took the transport job. He dressed like everyone else. He walked among the people nobody noticed, and he listened. For months, Keno had deliberately allowed people to underestimate him. Not because he was ashamed of his work, but because people reveal more when they think you are harmless. Mira looked at him with disbelief. "You let everyone insult you?" Keno smiled. "Sometimes protecting your peace means refusing to fight every battle." That night, Keno returned to the terminal. He saw an envelope on a bench. He opened it. Inside was the money that had supposedly been stolen. But there was something else, a note that says, "Take this and disappear. Nobody will believe you anyway." Keno stared at it. Now he understood. Someone had tried to create one final trap. If the money was found in his possession, he would be blamed. Keno placed the money back into the envelope. Then he looked towards the security camera, and that was when he said, "If they discover what is inside this envelope, they will blame me for everything." Keno didn't run. He walked directly into the security office and reported what he found. The investigation eventually revealed that Rafi had been using false expense entries and manipulated receipts to divert money from the terminal. The evidence was enough to clear Keno and expose the scheme. Several weeks later, the terminal changed. Workers began receiving proper payment record. Passengers were treated with more respect. The dishonest accounting system was replaced, and Keno, he received an offer to become the terminal financial operations supervisor. But everyone expected him to accept it immediately. But he didn't. Instead, he asked for something else. He requested that the company create a transparent system where drivers, cleaners, loaders, and other workers could see how their money was calculated. He wanted ordinary workers to understand their own earnings. Mira watched him from across the office. "You could have asked for a bigger salary." Keno smiled. "I did." She laughed. "What did you ask for?" "Fairness." Mira shook her head. "You're strange." Keno smiled. Keno eventually left the transport yard and opened a small bookkeeping and business support office with Mira. Not because Mira rescued him, not because he suddenly became rich, and not because his old life was something he needed to escape from. He simply found an environment where his abilities were finally appreciated. Mira watched him quietly, then she smiled, because she finally understood something. Keno's greatest achievement wasn't exposing Rafi. It wasn't getting a better job. It wasn't proving that he was educated. His greatest achievement was that the way people treated him never changed the way he treated other people. One evening, Mira and Keno sat outside their small office. The streets were becoming quiet. Mira looked at him. "Do you ever think about what people called you?" Keno smiled. "TOUT, street boy, uneducated, untrustworthy." Keno laughed softly. "And now?" Mira smiled. "Now they call you Mr. Keno." He shook his head. "Names don't matter." "What matters then?" Keno looked at the people walking along the road. "Character." He paused. "Because clothes can change, money can disappear, positions can be lost. But when everything else is removed," he looked at Mira, "your heart is what remains." Never judge a person's heart by the position they occupy. The man you ignore today may be carrying the kindness, wisdom, and courage that your world desperately needs tomorrow.